We are now up to Perek Yud Ches in Sefer Shmuel Aleph, and we had just read of David killing the giant Goliath, who, by the way, was a son of Orpah. So Rus and Orpah were sisters. David HaMelech comes from Rus, and Goliath comes from Orpah. Vayihi kechalosel daber el Shaul, that after David talked to Shaul and he showed him that he had killed Goliath, and he even showed him his head. V'nefesh Yahaina's son Nikshra b'nefesh David. This was the start of the friendship between Yaina's son, that is Shaul's son, and David. V'yehaveyu Yahaina's son kinapshay. And Yahaina's son loved David like he loved his own soul. And vayikocheu Shaul bayayimahu v'lo nisano lashuv beis aviv. From that day forward, Shaul made David a permanent part of the royal court, and David was no longer able to go back home to graze his father's sheep. Vayichrais Yahainason v'David bris. Yainason and David had a covenant of friendship. Biavaso oso kinafsho. Right? Chazal always used the love of David and Yainason as an unconditional love, a friendship that is so deep. A'ava she'ena tluya b'davar. And ad kedei kach, that the pasuk says, Vayis pashet Yahainason es ha'me'il asher alav. He took off the royal coat that he wore, v'yitneu leDavid, and he gave it to David. Umadav, and his special garments, ad charbo, and his special sword, ad kashto, his special bow, chaguro, his special belt. And David became an emissary of Shaul to engage in wars against the Philistines. Vayetze David b'chol asher yishlachenu Shaul yaskil. Any mission that Shaul sent him on, yaskil, he was b'hatzlacha. Vayisimeu Shaul al anshei hamilchama. David became a general in Shaul's army. Vayita b'einei kol ha'am, gam b'einei avdei Shaul. And David was beloved by the people, generally, and David was beloved by Shaul's staff as well. Vayihi b'vayam b'shuv David mi'akosas haplishti. And when David would come back successful after a war against the Philistines, Vateitzena hanashim mikol arei Yisrael. So women would go out. It was like a parade. Women would go out, and they would sing. Again, we can't get into the halachas of Kailisha. How can you have women singing to men? Was there an issue of trei koli, more than one woman singing? Would that be a heter? Or is the din of Kailisha only a drabanan, and the drabanan wasn't made yet? Or possibly the word shir does not have to be music. It might just mean proclamation. So again, one has to be ma'ayin into the halachas here. Or perhaps the women sang away from the men, although you see that Shaul heard of this at least. But it does say that the women gathered and they sang mimecholos, and they were dancing likra Shaul HaMelech, to greet Shaul b'tupim, with drums, b'simcha, with great rejoicing. Shalishim, three-stringed instruments, like harps of 3 strings. And what would they say? V'tanena hanashim hamisachakot v'tomarna. And the women that were playing would proclaim. This is what they would say. Hika Shaul bi'alafav v'David b'rivavosav. Shaul has been successful in smiting and defeating the thousands, and David has been successful in smiting and defeating the myriads, the 10,000s. In other words, David was praised greater than Shaul, although Shaul is the king and David is simply a general at this point. Vayichar l'Shaul ma'od, and Shaul was very perturbed. Vayera b'einav hadavar zeh, this was very bad in his eyes. He was jealous. This is part of the Ruach Ra. Vayomer, Nasnai leDavid revavais, v'li nasnu ha'alafim. To David they credit defeat of the myriads. And to me, I only get credit for the thousands, for the alafim. Little does he know. In a little bit, he's going to get the malchus, which of course is true, but Shaul does not know that yet. And from that day, the relationship changed. Before we had read that Shaul loved David, and David calmed him down, and David brought him solace and happiness. But from that day, Vayehi Shaul uyein es David, mi'ayom ahu v'hala. From that day on, Shaul was filled with jealousy against David. From that day on, and regarded him as an enemy. Vayehi mi'macharas, and it was the next day, Vatislach ruach Elokim royal Shaul, when Shaul was seized by the negative ruach Elokim of depression and despondency. Vayisnabe b'toch habayis, and he was prophesying, but again, this was not a real nevuah, but this was a sense of prophetic rejection, feeling that Hashem was rejecting him. V'David minagein biyado, and David is playing the harp. David is still doing his job to make Shaul calm down and feel simcha. Ki yom v'yom. Right? David is not aware of an enmity here. Hachanit biyad Shaul, and Shaul is holding a spear. And in the middle of David HaMelech's playing the harp, Shaul takes the spear and he throws it at David. Tries to kill him. Vayotel Shaul et Hachanit. Shaul takes the spear. Vayomer, and he says to himself, Akeh b'David uvakir, I will hit David, and the spear will go into the wall. Vayisov David mipanav pa'amayim. David was able to duck twice. Shaul tried this twice in one day, in one meeting. And, obviously this must have shaken up David. But at this point, Vayira Shaul malifnei David. This is a new thing at this point. Not only is Shaul jealous, but Shaul is now afraid of David. He sees that Hashem is protecting David. David defeats Goliath. Shaul tries to kill David twice. Nothing happens. He sees that Hashem is with David and Hashem is not with him. And Shaul is not only depressed, Shaul is frightened. Ki haya Hashem imai. Hashem is with David. Umeim Shaul sar. And Hashem turned away from Shaul. Well, obviously Shaul could not have David as his musician anymore. Vayisireyu Shaul me'imai. He removed David from being the musician. He didn't want David in his presence because it had the opposite effect. It got him upset. Vayisimeyu loy Shmuel Aleph. He made him a general. Again, the hope would be that David would be killed in war. Vayetze v'yavo lifnei ha'am. And what? Vayhi David l'chol drachav maskil. David, in all of his endeavors, was successful. V'Hashem imai. Because when Hashem is with you, you will always be successful. Vayar Shaul asher hu maskil ma'id. And when Shaul saw that David was very successful in everything, Vayagar mipanav. Once again, Vayagar. Shaul was terror-stricken because he knew he was going to lose everything. V'chol Yisrael v'Yehuda oyeves David. And here we're told that all of Yisrael and Shevet Yehuda, which was so large and important that they were mentioned separately, they all loved David. So it was not just that David was a successful person, but David was a beloved person. Because he would go out to war at the head of the army, not in the back, not in a tent. He was at the head of the army. So now, Shaul, in spite of everything, we're going to see a complicated story, Shaul did make a promise that anybody who kills Goliath gets to marry my daughter. And now Shaul is going to seemingly make good on that promise. Vayomer Shaul el David. Shaul says to David, Hine biti hagdaila meirav. My oldest daughter is Meirav. Osa etain lecha leisha. I am giving you my daughter Meirav as a wife. Ach heya li leben chayil v'ilachem milchamot Hashem. But you have to continue to wage war. And the reason was, the pasuk tells us, Shaul Amar, it was Shaul's cheshbon, al tehi yadibo. I don't want to kill him directly, that I'm going to be punished by Hashem. Usehibo yad pelishtim, let the Philistines come. Again, very similar to what David did towards the end of his life with Uriah Hachiti, Shaul did to David. Now, the king is telling him, you can marry my daughter. Vayomer David el Shaul, mi anoichi, who am I, umi chayai mishpachas avi b'Yisrael, and how important is my father's home? Ki eya chasan lemelech, do I deserve to be the son-in-law of the king? But, in spite of this, Shaul reneged. Vayihi boes teis es Meirav bat Shaul leDavid. When the time came that Meirav was supposed to be given to David, V'hi nitna liadriel hamachaylasi laisha. Shaul reneged on the commitment, and he married off his daughter to another man, Adriel, from the city of Machola. I'll come back to this. I want to read the next pasuk. But Shaul had another daughter. Vateyahav Michal bat Shaul es David. But Michal, the daughter of Shaul, loved David. V'yagidu l'Shaul, and they told Shaul, Vayishar adav Rabbi Einav, and Shaul agreed to it. Vayomer Shaul, and Shaul said to David, Etnen lo, I will give Michal to you, uzihi lo l'mokesh. But the hope would be, again, that this would actually be a stumbling block, meaning to say that the condition was that David would have to keep on fighting, and the hope would be that David would get killed in war. Utibo yad pelishtim, vayomer Shaul el David, bishtayim tischatein bihayom. With two of my daughters you will get married. Again, what does that mean? Two of the daughters, etc. Now, let me explain this a little bit, because this is quite complicated. First of all, the following. If David was David married to Meirav, when it says that when he gave his daughter to Meirav, he then gave her to Adriel? What exactly happened? So there is a machlekes among the Meforshim. Some Meforshim learn that David was never married to Meirav at all. In other words, Shaul simply broke the promise and gave her to Adriel, and the only daughter of Shaul that David married was Michal bat Shaul. He never married Meirav. And when Shaul says, I have given you two of my daughters, he's just alluding to the fact that I promised you one daughter, and I'm giving you the other daughter. That is pshat number one. Pshat number two, however, is that David did marry Meirav, but Shaul gave her away to another man, bi'avera, Pella. Shaul did not recognize the marriage. Well, that's a big problem, of course, but the other problem is, halachically, if David was married to Meirav, then how could he marry Michal? The Torah prohibits marrying achais isha. Bishlama, if we learn he was not married to Meirav, he could marry Michal. But if he was married to Meirav, even if Shaul took her away bi'avera, how could David marry Michal? So the Gemara says that there's a bit of information that is not given in this pasuk, and that is, Meirav died shortly thereafter, and the halacha is, achais isha is mutter after the death of the achais. So be it as it may, David did not wind up with Meirav, but David did marry Michal. Okay. So now, pasuk Chavbei says, Vayitzav Shaul es avadav. Shaul commands his servants, Daber el David, but let's speak to David privately, secretly. Lamor. Hine chavetz b'cha melech, the king loves you, the king wants you, v'chol avada v'avucha, all the servants love you. Ata hischatein b'melech, because again, David is a little reluctant. Vayidaber avdei Shaul b'yoznei David as advar ma'ila v'yomer David hanekale b'einechem hischatein b'melech. Do you think it's a small thing to marry the king's daughter? Anochi ish rush v'nikla, I am a poor and shameful person. V'yagidu avdei Shaul loy, and the Avadim told Shaul that, Michal loves David, and you want David to marry Michal, but David doesn't want to do it. Kadvar ma'ela diber David. Vayomer Shaul, kai saimru leDavid. Tell David the following: Ein chayfetz lamelech b'mayar. He doesn't have to give me a dowry. In other words, if you want to marry Michal, don't think you have to be wealthy, and don't think you have to have prestige and bring me a dowry. All you have to do to marry Michal is meya orlois polishtim lihinakein bi'ovei hamelech. If you bring me 100 foreskins of Philistines, meaning kill 100 Philistines and cut off the foreskins, and that would be giving me that, and you will be Makadesh Michal by giving me the father. Apparently Michal is a Naira. She's not 12 and a half yet, so the father could be Makabel Kedushin. V'Shaul Chasha, but again, Shaul's cheshbon was Lahapel es David, that David would die against these Philistines. This is his machshava. V'yagidu avado, David says, Warma'ila, the avadim told him that, V'yishar David agreed, V'schatein b'melech, to marry Michal. V'lo malu ayamim, and it didn't take very long. V'yakum David yelechu v'anashav yachba plishtim. David smote the Philistines double, Masayamish. He did 200, not 100. V'yavi David asar l'sayim v'yimalim l'melech, and he fulfilled the condition. Vayitain lai Shaul es Michal bitai laisha. Well, Shaul is not so happy about David being his son-in-law. But vayar Shaul vayeda ki Hashem im David. He sees once again Hashem is with David. And not only that, but Michal bat Shaul ahavasai. And his own daughter loves David. So his son is David's best friend, and his daughter loves David. Vayosef Shaul lira b'mei David ait. So what happens is Shaul is afraid of David. David's taking everything. David's going to take the malchus. David's going to take the popularity. David's going to take the victories. David's going to take his own family, his daughter and his son. Vayi Shaul oyev es David kol hayamim. And Shaul now became the enemy of David for the rest of his life. Vayetzu sarei plishtim v'himidei tseisam sochal David mikol avdei Shaul vayikar shmo ma'id. And then it just emphasizes that whenever the Philistine officials would wage wars or battles against the Jews, David was always matzliach, more than any of the other servants or soldiers of Shaul. And his name became very precious, very well known. And that was a thorn in the side of Shaul. So Ad Kan, Perek Yud Ches.